Welcome to the Aging Boomers. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, on our show, we discuss so many of the issues facing boomers, their parents, and what we know, of course, is an aging population today. I want to remind everybody that today's show is sponsored by Senior Care Authority, a senior placement and elder care consulting organization that has a national network of professionally trained and experienced local advisors to assist families. They'll work with you in determining the right path for you or your loved one and discuss various long-term care options, whether it's in-home care, assisted living, possibly memory care, or if you just need an advocate, somebody to get advice from. A Senior Care Authority advisor in your area will be happy to help you. So for a free 30-minute consultation with an advisor, please contact Senior Care Authority at 888-809-1231. Or you could go directly to their website at www.seniorcareauthority.com. And I just want to thank everybody for all their support. So many of you have connected various means. Of course, we have various shows on radio stations as well as on iTunes, iHeartRadio. Many of you have downloaded our free app, The Aging Boomers. Of course, we're on iTunes, iHeartRadio, and many other online stations. And our audience has grown each and every day. I want to thank you all for that. We've grown also because of our great guests and just great information. And we have another wonderful guest today. We have with us Christopher MacLellan, who is the founder of Whole Care Network, and has written a powerful and compelling book, What's the Deal with Caregiving, that informs caregivers about how to deal with the challenges they will encounter, regardless of sexual orientation, family situation, or age. Chris and his partner, Rich Schiffer, were chronicled in a Pulitzer Prize nominated story, In Sickness and in Health, A Couple's Final Journey, about their journey of caregiving. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us on our show. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Frank. Thanks for the invitation.
And I understand you do a podcast as well. You've been doing it longer than I have. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, I do a podcast called Healing Ties. My tagline is the bow tie guy, and we talk about caregiving. We talk about caregiving from the angle of before, during, and like myself, after caregiving, because there's two very common aspects to caregiving. There's a beginning and there's an end, and in most cases, we're not prepared for either one of those life-changing events. So that's what we end up really talking about and exploring on the Healing Ties podcast.
Great. How can people find out about your podcasts? Where would they go?
Well, a variety of areas, just like yours. We're featured on the Whole Care Network, but iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, Google Play, goodness, just about any major podcast platform.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I hope you'll get some more listeners. I want to just start out because I read your intro and the fact that you were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. What led up to your involvement with that whole story? Tell us more.
Well, I appreciate that, Frank, because the story, even 4 years past, is still very special. But we were approached by a reporter from the South Florida Sun Sentinel, Diane Lade. The Sun Sentinel was interested in doing a caregiving story on same-sex couples. What were the similarities and what were the differences? And I had already been blogging about caregiving on my blog, The Purple Jacket, and I'd had a relationship with the reporter with some other projects that an agency that I had been working with in senior care. So she approached us. They wanted to do a pictorial story. And this was before my partner Richard's cancer had resurfaced. But early on into the process, Richard's cancer did return. And subsequently, in our first visit to the hospital, we had experienced some discrimination as a same-sex couple. And that's kind of when the story, the process of the story changed, when the reporters noticed that there was something a little bit bigger here than just same-sex caregiving, and that's how this morphed into this story that has been read over 500,000 times by people worldwide. I still get contacts about the story today, as evidenced by you and I chatting about it. So I'm blessed that I have a special memory of my deceased partner, Richard, but I also know that that the story was successful because it really talked about love, care, and commitment, not only as partners but as caregivers as well, and that's why the story really connected with so many people.
Yeah, it would be in my opinion, a shame if caregiving was really treated any different for same-sex couples, but the fact that there was a whole story written, I got to believe it is different. Can you tell us more?
Well, I can, but I do want to start out by saying that when it comes to caregiving, there's really no gender, economic, and orientation boundaries. Caregiving impacts everybody. But for us, and I think it's important for your listeners to know that our story happened before marriage equality became the law in the United States. But immediately at our first visit to the emergency room, the two doctors came into the room, and they immediately started peppering Richard with questions, one after another, rapid fire. And I was sitting to the left, and I just kind of spoke up, and I said, I might be able to help you out with some information here. And they both turned and looked at me and said, "Well, who are you?" And then a day later, we went down for a test of nuclear medicine, and one of the techs there asked me what I was doing there and why I was doing there. And those are, some of the nuances that same-sex couples often experience, especially in the healthcare setting. And while marriage equality has kind of changed that now, there still are some instances where people will feel uncomfortable or be questioned because of people's own personal beliefs and positions that they have on this issue. But I just have to say, Frank, when it comes to somebody's health and well-being, there shouldn't personal opinions and prejudices really should be put on the side, and
right.
We should focus really on what's best for the person who is in need of the help. And I think that kind of came through in our story, and I'm so grateful to have something like that available to be able to talk about it still to this day.
So when did that your story with with Richard, when did that come out? How long ago? How many years ago?
Yeah, that was published in April of 2014, and then nominated in February of 2015 for a Pulitzer Prize. The two reporters followed us for 7 months, and originally the piece was supposed to be finished by Christmas of 2013, but Richard's health had deteriorated so much over the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays that they wanted to continue the story, and actually they wanted to follow us. And they said, we would like to follow you too until Richard makes his transition, which he did.
So in those years since it came out, have you seen changes? People's feelings, attitudes? Have you seen change?
For me personally, I have. I think, again, I'm a little prejudiced. I think the story helps build bridges and shows an understanding that again, love, care, and commitment are the same for any two people, no matter what gender. But I also, I'm not naive. I do understand that there's always going to be personal bigotry. That's something that we're we're just never going to be able to get beyond. But when we're able to look at this issue, especially the caregiving issue, through the lens of love, care, and commitment, I think everybody gets that, because everybody wants to have the best care possible for the person that they're caring for, especially when it comes to end of life.
Right. So, what advice would you give to someone who, let's say, is part of the LGBT community and maybe doesn't have a family member to assist with care, needs care? So how do you go about it so you don't get in a situation with prejudices that could have an effect on your care? Any advice you could give to people in that situation?
Well, a couple of things, Frank, and thanks for asking that, because in the LGBT community, especially in the senior LGBT community, they're often by themselves. They're with families of choices. But with that, which is very common whether you're gay or straight, there's so many people out there that don't have their advance directives in order. They don't have their durable power of attorney in place. They don't have their wishes documented so that somebody can advocate for them when they can't advocate for themselves. And I think when we're in the middle of caregiving, we sometimes forget that really the most important role of a caregiver is to advocate, but you can't advocate unless you know what the person wants. And it's about having those difficult discussions and conversations about end-of-life wishes, what you want, and when you're not able to speak for yourself. And I would encourage not only members of the LGBT community, but everybody that's listening, if you haven't had your advance directives, power of attorneys, you haven't had those looked at in more than 2 years, it's time to revisit those. If you don't have one now, you don't want to have these conversations on the way in an ambulance on the way to a hospital. You want to do those important documents now and get them out of the way, because it's going to make an already difficult situation just a tad bit easier when you know you have these documents in place.
Got it. Good advice for everybody. For everybody.
Yeah, because that's because really when you get right down to the day-to-day issues, whether you're gay or straight, they're the same. It's about being proactive in your care. It's about having your documents in order, your advocates in place. And sure, there's some nuances for the gay community as it relates to discrimination, but having those documents in place and having them with you, especially when you're dealing with healthcare providers that you're not familiar with, that is your ability to really demonstrate to folks that you do have legal rights. As your listeners, if they get a chance to read the story, they'll see I carried a green folder around with me everywhere I went, and that green folder had all of our legal documents in it, because I didn't know if I was going to run into somebody, a medical healthcare provider or somebody in the legal department that didn't know us, that I would have to prove that I had the formal legal documents in place to be his advocate. That's not the same for heterosexual couples. They don't have to carry their documents with them.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I want to get your opinion on something. So I know, at least I believe, your discussion is more about, caregiving possibly at home. As you know, that the business that I've been involved with for many years has been to assist families and helping them find, if they can't be safely at home anymore, then maybe moving into some sort of assisted living or memory care might be a better option, and that's kind of where that next step. And what I I guess it opened my eyes. What I've seen, and no statistics here, just my own observation, is that I really haven't seen much concern or prejudice coming from caregivers in that type of a situation, as much as the residents themselves. And have you seen that as well? And do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, fine, we could educate caregivers, okay? And I think you do a great job at that. But how do we educate, residents, especially those that, might have some dementia issues? It could be taking them back. Maybe they were prejudiced at a younger age, and as they grew older, they realized that it's wrong. But the dementia's taking them back to where they were. I've actually seen that. Any thoughts on that? It's the tough one, I know, but any thoughts?
It is a tough one. I think it kind of comes down, and I don't mean to make this a very important and difficult question. My answer is somewhat simple in a sense, but I think it really just comes down to people getting to know one another face to face. If we're going to judge somebody by labels, then we're never going to get beyond that label. But if we can sit across the table with somebody and talk about something that they have in common, then really orientation it really doesn't really play into the conversation, because we all have our own likes and dislikes. We all have, for instance, if I'm sitting with somebody that I don't know, and we might both be hockey fans. Well, how would I not know that unless I didn't have a conversation? Or if I just thought that, if that person's the way he is, I'm not going to talk to them, then I'll never get to know them. Right. We have to get beyond. We have to find a way to get beyond the labels, and I think that all comes with communication. And there's an area of communication that we often forget about, and it's called listening. Mm-hmm. Yes. And if we could find the time to truly listen, then I think we have a better understanding of where somebody's coming from and who they are.
Right. Good advice. So I'm interested to learn a little bit more. Tell us a little bit more about your book. The book is called What's the Deal with Caregiving? Great name. Tell us a little bit about it and how people could learn more in getting your book.
Well, I appreciate that. The book it's not a how-to book. It's not a memoir. It's maybe a little bit of a combination of both. It really is a taken from my experience as a caregiver. I talk about some of the things that I did well, some of the things that I would have liked to have done over. I also talk about the importance of self-care, and I think as caregivers learn to advocate for the person that's entrusted in their care, we forget about taking care of ourselves. And I talk a lot about my inability to not take good care of myself, both physically, spiritually, financially, because I was so engrossed in care for somebody else that I forgot to take care of myself. And that's a common theme that I hear with caregivers across the board, is that they lose themselves in the midst of caregiving. But the book is available on Amazon. It's available on the Whole Care Network, the Purple Jacket. I'm hoping to do a second edition here in 2019. But it was just, again, it was another way for me to give back to the caregiving community, because and this is another thing that connects you and I, Frank. I believe it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to combat a common cause. All caregivers have a story. And when we share our stories, we also come up with better resources, more trusted resources, And that's why we do what we're doing, because we want to ensure that people have just a little bit better experience than what we had. And that's through the story sharing.
As you know, and you do a podcast, things it goes fast. All right, so I just kind of took a look at the time, and I want to make sure. I have a couple more questions for you, but one in particular, I don't want us to run out of time without you telling us a little bit more about your organization, the Whole Care Network. Exactly what do you do, and tell us a little bit more about that and how people can learn more.
Well, the Whole Care Network is actually it's debuted last November, and we are a multimedia platform for caregivers to share their stories. One of the unique features of the Whole Care Network is all the podcasters that are on the Whole Care Network right now are new to podcasting, but they have a story to share or a useful product for caregivers. So we have it's just like in caregiving. I have one voice, but by having more voices on a network that focuses on caregiving, I think it just helps caregivers, because not everybody's going to connect with just me. But if you have 10, 15, 20 different people who are sharing their stories, or for instance, the gentleman who does our dementia show, Richard had cancer, so I didn't have to deal with dementia and caregiving. That's there's a whole separate set of issues, and I wouldn't be the one to talk about that. I mean, I could relate to the caregiving story, but the ins and out of the dementia component would be a little bit different for me. So in trying to bring all voices together to serve one cause, that I think that's in a nutshell what we're trying to do with the Whole Care Network.
That's right. And the website is, I want to make sure you...
The website is thewholecarenetwork.com.
Okay.
And you can search out all our shows. You can look at our show host, and you can see my bio and the link to the Pulitzer Prize nominated story in Sickness and Health, A Couple's Final Journey, is on that on my bio as well. And I'm pretty much all over the internet as the bow tie guy. So
yeah, I saw that. I didn't mention that in your intro, and I should have. But people will see it if they're listening to the podcast right now. They see your picture up there with the great bow tie. That's great. So I just, maybe we could take a couple of minutes or so and really just based on your experience, certainly 4 years past, your caregiving experience, I guess what would you have done differently now, knowing what you know now? And two-part question, and then just advice you can give to someone who's listening, who's either about to be a caregiver to a family member or friend, or maybe just started to become one. And just any advice you could give. So kind of a two-part question. For folks who are about to become a caregiver or who are currently a caregiver, just a couple of things. Be mindful of your self-care and learn as comfortably as you can that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. We all think that our caregiving cape, we can do all this together, all this by ourselves, but we can't. We need to create a care team. And if there was two things that I would like to do over, especially the last 6 months of Richard's life, I would have reached out for help quicker, because I didn't realize how bad I was spiraling down. And I thought I could do this all myself: work, take care of him, balance everything. Yeah, you can't do it. All of a sudden, your life becomes
becomes difficult. 45 extra pounds, it does happen. But if you're mindful that there are people out there that are willing to help and just ask for the help, you're going to be better off in the long run. And then I think it's also important, if I could add this,
Sure.
Frank, and I mentioned it earlier, but there's two aspects to caregiving. There's a beginning and an end, and we're not prepared for either one of these events. For me, caregiving ended more than 4 years ago, but I've had to learn to be a caregiver to myself. And, with that, just a couple of real quick things here for you, that when it does end, it does get better in your own time, but that time is going to be different for everybody. The grieving process is going to be different for everybody, but like a flower that needs to be a plant and a flower that needs to be watered to bloom, you have to find those outlets so that you can bloom again and live your life to the fullest. And what I've learned from that experience is that my faith tells me that I will see him again. My mind tells me he's forever pain-free, and my heart tells me he's standing right beside me. And that allows me to move on with my head held high, because I know that in his life transition, two people were impacted in different ways, but he got everything that he wanted at his end of life because we had that conversation. I just needed to take better care of myself during and after his life transition, so I could excel.
Chris MacLellan, thanks so much for joining us. Just very enlightening, and I appreciate you taking the time. Good luck with your podcast. Check out his website, wholecarenetwork.com, and hopefully pick up his book, What's the Deal with Caregiving? So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the Aging Boomers.
It's been a pleasure, Frank.
Yeah,
thank you.
I want to thank everybody out there for joining us as well. Just be safe out there, and we'll talk to you all soon.